and welcome aboard the TW Time Machine. Over the next 4 weeks, join us as we travel through time to revisit some of the greatest moments from 33 years of tomorrow's world.
We've got some fantastic clips for you, but it's going to be much more than a mere nostalgic trip down memory lane. We've done a lot of detective work, finding out whatever happened to some of those classic inventions we promised would take the world by storm.
And we'll be turning the camera on you. Each week we'll hear from someone whose life has been transformed, all because they watched Tomorrow's World.
On tonight's show, he's back. The one and only Raymond Baxter takes us through his rock and roll years. This week, Harold Wilson bids goodbye to number 10 and Tomorrow's World showcases the Kaleidophone. But what's the year?
Also, 15 years ago, this rolling stock was a laughing stock. Tonight, we signal the return of the tilting train.
And Susanna's story, the life-saving mission that began the night she saw Tomorrow's World.
And we begin with a truly extraordinary piece of film, and we'd never have found it if we hadn't had an intriguing letter from David Ricks in Surrey, who says, years ago my grandmother was involved in solar energy research, and I have a weird memory of a clip of an early Tomorrow's World that showed my grandmother and some of her more wacky projects. Can you help? She died some years ago, and I've been told by my mother that it never happened, but I'm sure it did.
Well, David, your mum is wrong and you were right, because we fed the words solar energy and granny into our extensive Tomorrow's World database, and funnily enough, only one clip showed up.
What a surprise.
So here she is, your grandmother, Brenda Carter, and her solar sentry boxes.
Tea, madam?
Yes, Jenkins, come in.
This is the Honourable Brenda Carter, and the thing she's sitting in is her own invention. It's an aluminium sun trap. Mrs. Carter is one of this country's experts in solar heating, and her prototype sun trap was so successful that she's gone on to design a bigger and better model. Principles exactly the same. Place your chair at the focus of the aluminium reflecting surfaces, and you could well be in Saint-Tropez. Mrs. Carter's even provided sun reflectors to heat up the bench where her retainers have their tea. Does wonders for the rheumatism. So the message is clear. Don't waste money sending your wife on a Mediterranean holiday. A couple of hours sunbathing in our own backyard, assisted by a few sheets of cooking foil, and you won't know her for the same woman.
You know, somehow I don't think we get away with a gag like that these days. Oh, and there is a footnote to that story, isn't there?
Brenda Carter's house burnt down some years ago, but her solar energy dream lives on. David's uncle is just about to finish building a new research project on the same site, a house powered only by the rays of the sun. So maybe next year we'll drop in on him and see how he's getting on.
It's a good idea. Right, here's a letter from Michael James Mannion from Blackpool, and he sounds quite desperate. He says, "Dear Tomorrow's World, please, 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 tell me what happened to the high-speed tilting train." Well, Michael, we're only too pleased to help. Back in the 60s, Tomorrow's World unveils plans for a new concept in rail transport, a radical high-speed train designed to woo travellers back to the tracks. The first prototype hit the rails in the early 70s with its most infamous feature, a mechanism that allowed it to tilt as it went round corners. The theory was that leaning into a bend in the same way a motorcyclist takes a corner allowed the train to travel faster without throwing the passengers around inside. It was all set to be the jewel in British Rail's crown. You just couldn't turn on the telly without hearing about it. They called it the Advanced Passenger Train. Can I ask you a question? What do you understand by the letters APT?
Nothing whatsoever, I'm afraid.
APT.
I've no idea.
Approximate. Pass.
15 years on and no one really remembers what the APT was all about. The high hopes of the 60s and 70s were dashed in the early 80s by a combination of complex new technology and a by now familiar problem, the wrong kind of weather.
We've been told that the train has been completely disabled by frozen-up compressed air pipes. The passengers are going to be taken back to Carstairs, where they'll board another train to continue their journey to London. And the advanced passenger train is going back to Glasgow to try and sort out the problems.
And here in Crewe is where the last of those tilting trains came to rest. The end of the line for the forgotten remnants of a fantastic dream.
It was my job to, and an unenviable job at that, to decide the future fate of the train that you see behind me. The decision, which was the right one under the circumstances, was to retire it. Scrap it would be another word for it.
What was wrong with it?
Well, interestingly enough, the tilt mechanism actually worked quite well, but the rest of the train, all the rest of the innovations were the problem.
Like the hydrokinetic braking system, for example. First week out, and the brakes froze. And before the dust could settle, an embarrassed British Rail put the APT under wraps. But 7 years later, Tomorrow's World went to Italy to report on a story that had a rather familiar angle to it.
As with the APT, the idea of this train is to get it going fast around the bends and also to give a smoother, more comfortable ride. And the effect as it banks into each of the bends is a little bit like being on a super comfortable roller coaster. It's really quite exciting. But if we switch the mechanism off for a moment, taking a bend at this sort of speed could be quite disastrous. See what I mean?
So, whilst a blushing Britain turned its attention to high-speed, non-tilting trains, other countries like Italy, Germany and Sweden developed the idea and now have working trains that tilt. But now, at long last, it seems as though the tilting train is coming home.
I have a dream. I want to make trains the most desirable way to travel. And the answer is tilting trains.
You see, I'm intrigued you're going to introduce tilting trains because they tried it in the past and it was a disaster. So what's going to be different this time?
Now, 25 years on, they've been well and truly tested. They've got the latest computer technology. And we're talking about cutting the time of the journey, say, from London to Glasgow by 1.5 hours, cutting the time of journey between London and Manchester by an hour, giving people a really comfortable journey for the first time.
Have you travelled on a tilting train?
No.
Great North Eastern Railways also plan to introduce tilting trains over the next 5 years. So now the race is on to supply the new trains. 10 companies are now competing to sell their version of the tilting train back to Britain, where the whole idea began. Richard Branson alone wants to buy 80 of them. So it now looks as though 30 years after Tomorrow's World first brought you news of the advanced passenger train, we will at last be able to see it and feel it as it tilts its way up and down the country.
So the tilting train is back on track, which means you won't see it in our next feature. This is a regular weekly tribute to all those great ideas that appeared on the show and then seemed to vanish. Round these parts we call it the curse of Tomorrow's World.
And this is a tidy place to store away your jumpers. When you press on the pedal, the top pops up so that the jumper can be folded neatly and then dropped onto the pile.
There are all sorts of figures to show the enormous amounts of energy the average British housewife uses in an average day's cooking. And it's not just slaving over a hot stove and lifting all those turkeys in and out of the oven.
There, that should be just about done. Warming dish this. Not the latest in plastic foods, but a new hot water bottle. Well, at least it's hot, but there isn't a bottle, and there's certainly no water.
And that's proof, surely, if proof were needed, that there's enormous room for improvement in British kitchen design.
A set of steps that converts into an ironing board.
You just give it a push, and round comes this super dishwasher.
This is a water-powered, turbocharged pan scourer.
You might be surprised at just what makes a good aerial. Believe it or not, you get just as good a picture from this rubber plant.
there. The water passes through these two pipes, so a jet goes in at both sides, and those two jets of water drive a turbine.
And my beautiful turkey's still doing well.
Look down the handle, and there's another set of bristles pointing inwards. Instead of all that awkward scrubbing around your fingers, you just insert one in here. And the designer suggests that a rotary action will ensure the removal of the most ingrained dirt.
It really does work.
Beautiful bird. Really, it is the most marvellous golden, crisp brown bird you ever saw.
Ah, the lovely William Woolard in his prime. And don't forget, Raymond will be along shortly with his rock and roll years. But first, millions of people have enjoyed watching Tomorrow's World over the years, but for some people, watching the programme changed their lives.
Susanna Stone runs a cheese factory in the Scottish Highlands, but she's also set up 4 cancer screening clinics. And the inspiration to do that came the night she saw Tomorrow's World.
My name is Susanna Stone. I founded this cheesery about 35 years ago. My husband asked me if I could make some of the old Crowdy, so I thought I'd make him enough to last a week. I ended up with 16 pounds of Crowdy, which shattered my husband. He was not a bit grateful. And I took the rest up to the grocer and asked him if he could possibly sell it. But he rang me up the next day and said, that Crowdy you brought in, Mrs. Stone, they've all come back for more. And that is really how it all started.
It wasn't long before Susanna found herself running a thriving business, responsible for the well-being of 15 women.
And at that point, I had heard that there was a lot of breast cancer around and that people should be checked early.
But when she tried to encourage her girls to visit the doctor, they were reluctant. They felt well enough, so they thought they'd just be wasting his time.
I then saw a programme on Tomorrow's World that showed a thing called a thermograph, and they said it was good for picking up breast cancer. And that seemed to me to be the answer. And I thought I would entice the girls by offering a picnic and a shopping spree and take them up in a minibus to Inverness to be checked by a thermograph. I was sure that they had one in the hospital. They didn't have one. I then tried Aberdeen. The girls thought this was fine, great idea. They were willing to be checked. Aberdeen didn't have one.
It seemed like there was nothing else for it. Together they decided to buy a thermograph, but not just for themselves. They'd make it available for the whole village.
And they all began raising funds, growing sunflowers or running marathons or tea parties or whatever. And it was marvellous. That was really how we got going.
It took them a couple of years to raise the £30,000 they needed to buy the thermograph, but by then an even better machine was on the market.
And this is it, a soft tissue scanner that if you put this torch through the breast, it comes up on the screen. You can see any strange shadows or anything else with it.
Susanna has now set up 4 clinics where over 8,000 women from the Highlands and Islands go for regular breast scans.
How are you today? Feeling a bit better today?
Yes, I am. I think it's a wonderful place. I really do. I encourage all my friends to come here.
I think it's great. If you feel anything at all, you can just phone them up and they'll fit you in. When I first saw Tomorrow's World, I had no idea whatsoever that it would lead to this. From making a few old Highland and Island cheeses, that suddenly here we are, screening women for breast disease from far and wide.
Right, here he is, the legend himself, Raymond Baxter.
Tonight, in my rock and roll years, we revisit the year of the long, hot summer. a Greek god stormed up the pop charts, and on Tomorrow's World we went high and we went fast. The year, 1976.
So I'll pack up my things and be on my way. Yes, here I go again.
Early in the year, there was a political bombshell. Harold Wilson announced he was leaving Number 10, prompting a few choice words from a future Prime Minister.
It would be ungracious not to wish him well in his retirement, or to complain too much that he's not taking his entire administration with him. But we'll attend to that.
The winds of change were blowing, and Judith Hann made good use of them to test the wind skate. Away from terra firma, Tomorrow's World had its eye on the future of flight.
Tornado represents truly European collaboration, a foundation upon which other military aircraft projects could easily be founded.
But for me, this was the plane of the year.
The arrivals were turned into what the Americans call a media event. First to land was the British Concorde, coming in just 3 hours and 50 minutes after taking off from London.
The first commercial flight of Concorde. Meanwhile, I jetted away with this.
The first pure jet car to be built in Britain, and aptly named Thrust, because the means of propulsion is this Rolls-Royce Derwent.
And at the wheel, future land speed record holder Richard Noble. As July the 4th approached, Tomorrow's World watched Britain's anniversary present to America take shape.
A perfect cast, but that's only the beginning. This new bell is having its voice trained. A skilled tuner can pick out over 40 different notes in a bell, and everybody stops breathing as the bell is swung for the very first time.
It gives me the greatest pleasure, on behalf of the British people, to present a new bell to the people of the United States of America.
Back in Britain, we stuck together to survive one of the hottest summers on record. The drought even had Tomorrow's World searching for water.
Several water authorities in Britain now have such severe problems, they're having to look outside their normal water supplies. They're even considering small streams and rivers like this.
This is a miniature version of the treatment unit. After the water's been chemically treated, it's pumped on into that filtering column of sand.
Ever and ever, forever and ever, you'll be the one.
Demis in fine form, but not even he could have dreamt of the musical revolution that lay just around the corner.
When man first thought he'd like to make his music electronically, naturally enough, he thought of a keyboard.
And it was reaction to just that kind of Stone Age thinking that led a rock musician to invent this. It's the mixed marriage between a violin and a plastic drain pipe. And it's a lot more subtle than any keyboard.
They called it the Kaleidophone, and it plays us out of 1976.
Well, I can't imagine why that didn't catch on. And there'll be another edition of Raymond's Rock and Roll Years next week.
Now, we always like to hear good news about inventors who've been on the show, like Dr. Colin Lane, who we first met in the 70s when he was pioneering a way of teaching hearing-impaired children to speak. 20 years on, his technique Arrow has become an unexpected success in ways he could never have predicted.
All the children in this class have varying degrees of hearing loss, from just below average to the severely impaired. The unit here in Somerset is one of several throughout the country which provides specialist education for deaf children. But what makes this unit unique is that the children are being taught speech and language development by a technique known as auditory feedback.
Take your hearing aids off.
The system was a simple way of helping children with hearing loss improve their speech. They would listen to phrases again and again, copying them until they could say the words properly.
I'm going to record that now. I'm going to record it, all right?
But the Arrow method had one unique characteristic. Colin began to notice that his pupils responded much better to the sound of their own voice than they did to the sound of anyone else's. So he began getting the children to make their own recordings.
The boy walked for something like this.
That's not right, you listen.
All he had to do was cut out their mistakes, giving them a good tape to work from.
Listen.
The boy walked away from the house.
The boy walked for...
Oh, let's get that right. The boy walked away from the house.
The boy walked away from the house.
Good.
It really is very, very strange to look back 20-odd years and to see not only the fact that I'm not as slim as I thought I was, but to see this idea, which started off in a very narrow way in a little classroom in Somerset with hearing impaired children, the way it's now developed and spread out into Europe and into North America and into so many schools in Britain.
20 years later, Arrow is now being used in about 600 schools all over the country. And not just for hearing impaired children, it's proved itself to be immensely valuable in mainstream schools.
Schools that use the system, like this junior school in Swindon, say that if children fall behind with reading and writing, Arrow can help. Once again, it's their own voice they're listening to. Teachers say their listening skills improve, their confidence goes up, and they concentrate much better in other lessons too. But Arrow's most recent and significant application has taken it out of the classroom altogether.
This is Tegwin Hall in Abergavenny, a specialist care unit. Here, Arrow is being used not to teach children, but to help adults with a range of psychiatric disorders.
Most of the residents here have used Arrow at some point or another, and the staff are genuinely impressed by the results.
I think the one thing that I've sort of noticed is the enthusiasm that the actual residents here show for it, especially when they've actually sort of developed their skills and know how to use it themselves. They just love it.
All the time.
Ina Baker is one resident who's really benefited. When she first came to Tegwin, she was suffering from severe personality disorder. She didn't trust people, and it was virtually impossible to communicate with her.
Even when we sleep.
But since she began using Arrow, Ina has changed dramatically. Her ability to read and write has vastly improved, and with it, her confidence.
He gave me some easy books for first, and I passed all of that. And he gave me a harder book, and you know I can do it now. Our brain has to keep all of our body working even when we sleep. The brain is always very busy.
The self-esteem that it's given Ina is incredible. This lady had no self-esteem and you could not sit down and talk to her at all. Now she will sit down, she'll actually come to staff, she's able to express herself so much better. It's unbelievable, and I'm sure anybody who would have nursed Ina before would find it hard to believe that she is the same person.
I mean, I don't mind going and don't mind doing this because it helps me when I go into society again. I know how to cope in that.
Having seen the way Arrow's moved on over the years, Dr. Lane believes that it has huge potential.
Arrow could help literally millions of people, and I'm talking millions in the UK, if we were given the opportunity. Things are beginning to develop, but it's taken 20 years and that's a long time.
No one's exactly sure why Arrow has the impact it has, but for many, Ina's case is recommendation enough. At the age of 45, she's taken on a job in a local hospital, her first step back into the outside world.
Everybody can do it if they tried. If they get the right teacher, they can do it. It really is marvellous.
Tremendous stuff. Well done, Ina and Dr. Lane. Now, this next part of the programme's simple enough, really.
You ask for your favourite Tomorrow's World clip and we play it for you. Even we've got the hang of this one.
True.
I've always enjoyed watching Tomorrow's World, if only for its enthusiasm and for its own views of the future. I seem to remember Raymond Baxter once presenting an idea of Tomorrow's Girl, and I'd love to see that again.
One other thing, the earrings. On Tomorrow's Girl, they wouldn't just be earrings, they'd be tiny transistor radios, light program for one ear, third for the other, every taste catered for.
Wonderful stuff. Now, you do know why paper clothes never caught on, don't you?
Why is that?
Because if you wore them and then you sweated, they turned to papier-mâché under your armpits.
Thanks for sharing that with us, and that's it for tonight. And to play us out, a moment of pure musical magic. Now, many of you will remember Michael Rodd, who's always been known as a bit of a studious lad, hasn't he? But as this final clip shows, lurking just beneath the surface was the John Bon Jovi of the 70s.
And we'll see you in the Time Machine at the same time next Wednesday. Good night.
Good night.
There are gonna be changes in my life, and I'm the first to break the news. I can watch the show at home next week. Back where I came from, I must sneak. From where I sit, the outlook's bleak, but I'm the one to lose. I got the too much technology blues.
Thank you, fellas.
Making time for the past on BBC Two in a moment, Patrick Macnee returns to his favourite 60s hideaway in Bosham on the Sussex coast.
On the Preston front, Lloydie's lost his sight.
I'm sorry, mate. I've still got CS gas in my eyes. It's your slowing for life.
Hodge has lost his touch.
Paulson's little sister is a mad, violent 20-year-old.
Normally a bit more heartbroken than that, aren't they?
And Diesel's lost his taste.
What the hell do you think you're doing? They all think he's a transvestite.
Senses working overtime.
Do you not listen?
On the Preston front, Monday at 10 on BBC One.
On one side, there was the entire system of justice.
Find the defendant guilty.
On the other, her best friend.
I'll do everything I can to help you.
Sunny will be in prison for the rest of her life.
All I know is I didn't do it.
Her lawyer should have let her testify. If the jury had heard her, they never would have convicted her.
This is suppressed evidence.
They didn't just cross the line. They tried to erase it.
A 16-year fight for freedom. A true story in the blink of an eye. Saturday at 9 on BBC One.
Prizing open another selection box of comedy delights in 15 minutes with Some Mothers Do Have 'Em here on BBC One. And that comes right after tonight's winning numbers.
It's Wednesday, and you know what that means. Another lottery draw. Tonight, a guaranteed jackpot. The stars of the much-talked-about series This Life. The music of Lewis Taylor. And the return of Carol Vorderman. Welcome to the...